You wake up to your feed in flames. Tweets flying. TikToks dissecting sound bites. Reddit melting down in real time. And at the center of it all, one name, said with the kind of reverence usually reserved for whistleblowers and rebellious icons. Sophie Cunningham. Let's just say the WNBA is not having a good PR week. Because Sophie didn't just spill some tea, she dumped the whole kettle over, lit a match, and walked away while the league scrambled to put out the fire. And now, she's gone. Done. Booted from the building like she showed up in a referee jersey and dared to call a foul on the W itself.
If you're here for the real story and not the filtered version, subscribe. And if you're sticking around for the next meltdown, you better definitely subscribe.
But how do we get here? How did one of the league's most outspoken and well-liked players end up on the receiving end of what looks a lot like a carefully orchestrated silencing campaign? And more importantly, what exactly did Sophie say that made the suits upstairs spiral into fine print panic? Let's rewind. For a while now, Sophie Cunningham has had a bit of a reputation, not in the scandalous off-court way, but in the she says what everyone else is thinking kind of way. She's gritty, she's honest, and she's never been afraid to call things out, whether it's bad officiating or the league's, let's call it selective transparency. And in a league that loves to tout empowerment and authenticity, just as long as it stays within the lines, Sophie was already walking a tightrope. But then came her podcast, Show Me Something, and suddenly, that tightrope, more like a live wire. Because on that mic, she got real. Not in a ragey, dramatic meltdown kind of way. More like telling the truth with receipts. She talked about officiating inconsistencies, about the W's internal politics, about things that every player whispers in the locker room, but no one dares to say into a microphone. And she did it all without trashing anyone. Just asking questions, raising eyebrows, being honest. So naturally, the league fined her. At first, it was subtle. A little slap on the wrist for a comment here, a social post there. But soon, the fines started piling up, quiet behind-the-scenes penalties that never made the headlines but hit the wallet anyway. Sophie was paying for her words, literally. And we're not talking massive checks either. Some of the fines? A few $100. But the message? Loud and clear. Shut up or pay up. But Sophie didn't shut up. She kept talking. She kept podcasting. She even talked about the fines. That's when things got really messy. Because now she wasn't just discussing officiating, she was peeling back the curtain on the league itself, exposing the secret system of silent punishment. The unwritten rule that if you talk too much, too freely, too honestly, you'll pay for it. And she was naming names, not of specific people, but of a system, a structure, a league more interested in controlling the narrative than listening to its players. And then, just like that, she was out. Not benched, not suspended, fired, waived under circumstances that have retaliation written all over them in invisible ink. No statement, no drama, just gone. Now, let's be real, WNBA players get waived all the time. It's a tough, competitive league with limited roster spots and tight cap space. But Sophie wasn't just any player. She was a fan favorite, a hustle queen, a starter, a no-name with real impact. And more than that, she was talked about, which, in a league desperate for engagement and relevance, is kind of the whole point. So the question becomes, why her? Why now? Well, maybe because she broke the unspoken rule. Maybe because she pointed a flashlight at the thing the league wanted kept in the shadows. Maybe because she dared to question why players, grown adults with lives, voices, and opinions, should be punished for talking like actual human beings. And fans noticed. Oh, they noticed. Within hours of the news dropping, Sophie was trending. Clips of her podcast went viral. Support flooded in from all corners of the internet. Players, analysts, fans, even some sneaky burner accounts clearly belonging to fellow athletes who didn't want to say too much, but also didn't want to stay quiet. People weren't just mad. They were insulted. Because the league that's always shouting, "Let the players speak," had just muzzled one of its most vocal stars. And for what? For telling the truth? For asking questions? For making a podcast that people actually listen to? It's giving fragile. It's giving image control. It's giving, We support women until they make us uncomfortable. Let's not pretend this is just about Sophie. This is about what happens when organizations care more about how things look than what's actually happening. When the vibe is keep it cute and on brand, not tell us what's really going on. And sure, the WNBA isn't the only league guilty of this. But when you're a growing league trying to build trust, attract fans, and stand for something bigger than just basketball, these choices matter. Silencing a player who is actually fostering conversation? Not a good look, especially when the fines themselves were petty. We're talking pocket change punishment for things like questioning officiating or speaking on internal operations. Not insults, not slander, just opinions, commentary, honest takes. You know, the kind of stuff every other sports league profits off of. But instead of leaning into the moment, of using it to spark dialogue, show growth, maybe even admit to some internal issues, the league hit mute, and then delete. And now they're dealing with the Streisand effect in real time, because firing Sophie didn't kill the conversation. It ignited it. And let's talk about the hypocrisy, because it's not like Sophie was the only one being vocal. Other players have absolutely made spicy comments on social media. Some have dragged referees. Some have thrown not-so-subtle shade at league policies. But how many of them got fined? How many of them got cut? Exactly. It's the inconsistency that's the real red flag here. The sense that Sophie was being targeted. That because she was persistent, because she wouldn't back down, because she had a mic and an audience, she became a problem. And if being a problem means asking for better officiating and transparency, then maybe the problem isn't the player. Maybe it's a system. Meanwhile, the league is trying to act like nothing happened. No statements, no clarity, just a vague silence that screams, "We hope this blows over." But fans aren't letting it go. They're watching. They're pissed. And more importantly, they're organizing. Threads, hashtags, demands. Because if you think people are going to forget that you kicked out one of your most real voices for being real, think again. So here we are. Sophie Cunningham, silenced by fines, then fired for telling us why. And the WNBA? Standing on the wrong side of conversation they could have led. They had a chance to be the league that says, "We hear you." The league that empowers honesty. The league that grows with its players, not in spite of them. Instead, they chose control. They chose silence. And they might have just lost more than a player. They lost trust. Because what fan wants to support a league that punishes truth? What player wants to stay silent, knowing they're one hot takeaway from a paycheck penalty? What message does it send when honesty gets you benched and silence keeps you safe? We'll say this. Sophie may be off the roster, but she's not off the radar. Her story's just beginning. And now, with nothing left to lose, she might just become the loudest voice the WNBA's ever tried to quiet. Athlete-run media is here, and it's not going away. If anything, it's getting louder. And Sophie? She's already got the mic. So WNBA, you had your chance. You could have listened. You could have grown. But instead, you fired the truth teller. And now the whole world's listening. If you think Sophie's going to stay quiet, think again. And if you've got thoughts, because we know you do, drop them in the comments. Should leagues be allowed to fine players for honesty? Or is this just another case of protect the brand at all costs? Subscribe for more deep dives into the chaos. And stay loud, stay curious. And remember, if telling the truth gets you fined, maybe you were never really free to speak in the first place. Sophie Cunningham, effectively exiled, the WNBA in PR lockdown mode, and fans clutching their metaphorical popcorn, wondering what bombshell comes next. And let's just say, the silence from a league? Deafening. No press conference. No transparent explanation. No accountability. Just a suspicious roster move, a string of past fines, and a growing pile of unanswered questions. It's the kind of damage control that doesn't actually control the damage. Because while the league might think it can outweigh the outrage, the truth is already out there. Sophie cracked open the vault. And what spilled out wasn't just a story about fines. It was a much bigger narrative. One about who controls the mic, who gets to speak, and what happens when a woman in sports decides she's done being careful. Let's not forget, this is professional basketball we're talking about. Trash talk, post-game rants, beef with refs, that's basically part of the package. The NBA practically thrives on it. But in the WNBA, apparently, telling the truth with context and clarity is more offensive than a missed travel call in overtime. And maybe that's what makes this so infuriating. Because Sophie wasn't some loose cannon popping off for clout. She wasn't dragging teammates or spiraling into scandal. She was doing the one thing leagues claim to support, advocating for a better game. But what the league really wants, it seems, is for players to advocate nicely, quietly, in PR-approved, pre-filtered language that never makes anyone at the top uncomfortable. Sophie didn't play that game. And the fines? Those weren't about her being wrong. They were about her being right and too vocal about it. Let's talk about those fines for a second. Because the second Sophie started publicly acknowledging them, it pulled the curtain all the way back. Suddenly, fans realized there was an entire secret economy operating behind the scenes. Quiet punishments for inconvenient speech. It's giving dystopia, like speak freely but not really energy, a kind of corporate gaslighting wrapped in empowerment slogans. And the more she spoke up, the more obvious the pattern became. The petty infractions, the flimsy justifications, the way she seemed to be singled out while others skated by for worse. We're talking fines for tone, for phrasing, for not reading the invisible script. At one point, it almost started to feel personal, which begs the question, was Sophie Cunningham the league scapegoat? The cautionary tale? The one they decided to make an example of so that the rest of the locker rooms would shut up and dribble? Because if so, yikes. That's not just short-sighted. That's damaging. And what's wild is that this is happening at the exact moment when women's sports are exploding. The spotlight is finally shifting. TV deals, merch, mainstream coverage, people are watching. And they're watching not just for the highlights, but for the stories, the personalities, the realness. Sophie was delivering that. She was building a brand, a following, and most importantly, trust. Fans believed her because she wasn't trying to sell you anything. She wasn't polished or packaged. She was raw, funny, sometimes blunt, but always honest. And in a media landscape where everything feels fake, that's gold. But the league? Instead of capitalizing on that transparency, they buried it. Like a corporation in full please stop asking questions mode. Like they forgot that authenticity is the brand now. So what happens next? Well, the league might be hoping this dies quietly. That Sophie disappears into off-season limbo. That fans move on to the next buzzy headline. But something tells me that's not how this is going to go. Because Sophie doesn't strike you as the go silent type. If anything, this might just be her origin story. The moment she goes from athlete to advocate, from player to media force. And you know she's got the audience for it now. Think about it. She already has the platform. She already has the support. And now she has the one thing you can't fake, stakes. She's lived it, been punished for it. She has receipts, war stories, and something real to say. Honestly, what league execs may have just created is a monster. A media-savvy, basketball-literate, truth-telling beast with a mic and nothing left to lose. The kind of figure who becomes bigger than the league that try to silence her. And let's be clear, this isn't just a WNBA problem. It's a sports culture problem. Because too many leagues talk about empowering players while still treating them like PR liabilities. Too many organizations still see transparency as a threat rather than an opportunity. But the fans? They're not buying it anymore. We're in the era of athlete podcasts, tell-all interviews, and real-time live stream rants. Fans want the mess, the nuance, the perspective you can't get from a post-game press conference full of cliches. Sophie was giving that, and she got benched for it. So here's what we're left with. A league that preaches empowerment but punishes autonomy. A fan base that's angrier than the league expected. A player who got fined for telling the truth and fired for telling people why. And a future that suddenly feels very unpredictable. Will other players step up? Will more stories come out? Will the league issue some half-baked damage control in a Notes app statement no one believes? Or will they double down and hope this fizzles out? Whatever happens, one thing's clear. This moment is bigger than just Sophie. It's about how much control a league thinks it should have over its players' voices. It's about whether sports organizations actually mean it when they say they value authenticity. It's about the tension between narrative and truth, branding and reality. And it's about what kind of culture women's sports want to build, not just for viewers, but for the athletes themselves. Because you can't say we support women on Instagram and then fine them for speaking like grown adults. You can't sell empowerment merch and then punish someone for using their platform. You can't expect loyalty when you're dishing out silence and censorship in return. And you definitely can't fire someone for opening their mouth and then act shocked when people start paying attention. At the end of the day, Sophie's meltdown, if you can even call it that, wasn't the story of a loose cannon going rogue. It was the story of a league choosing silence over self-reflection, branding over bravery. And if you ask me, that's the real meltdown here. So congrats, WNBA. You didn't just lose a player. You created a symbol. You turned Sophie Cunningham into the poster child for speak your truth, even if it costs you everything. And trust me, that poster, people are hanging it up. Sophie Cunningham didn't just say too much. She said the wrong kind of truth. The inconvenient kind. The kind that makes league offices shuffle papers and call emergency PR meetings with phrases like containment strategy and media fatigue. Spoiler alert, they're the ones that look tired now. Let's break this down for what it really is: punishment disguised as professionalism. See, when Sophie hopped on that mic and spoke about referees, internal league operations, and the feeling of being muzzled, she wasn't ranting. She wasn't pulling a scorched earth tantrum or trashing her employer in some dramatic tell-all. She was calm, measured, direct. But oh no, that was the problem. Because nothing scares a fragile institution more than someone exposing the cracks without yelling. When you're cool, articulate, and already have a following, now you're the threat. Not just for what you say, but for how many people are actually listening. That's what pushed the WNBA over the edge. And let's be real for a second. Sophie wasn't just some random benchwarmer with a microphone. She was a starter, a visible name, a key piece of the Phoenix Mercury who had been re-signed with the team and repeatedly proven her value on the court. This wasn't about performance. This was about precedent. They wanted to send a message to players, to fans, to anyone else who might be considering starting their own podcast or getting a little too real on Instagram Live. Watch your mouth, or we'll make an example out of you too. It's a warning wrapped in a pink slip. But here's where it gets awkward. They picked the wrong person to silence. Because Sophie Cunningham, she's got receipts. She's got range. And now she's got nothing left to lose. You think she's going to fade away quietly? That after being fined, cut, and shoved out the door, she's going to disappear into the background like some forgotten free agent? Come on. This is 2025. Athletes are the media now. They're building empires out of podcast microphones and YouTube channels. And you can bet your last official league statement that Sophie's going to double down. She's already halfway through a rebrand from player to platform. It's giving exposed docuseries in development. It's giving TED Talk meets whistleblower. It's giving actual accountability, serve with a side of I told you so. And the fans? Oh, they're eating it up. Because if there's one thing sports audiences love, it's the underdog arc, but only when the underdog fights back. Sophie's not just a symbol of dissent. She's the face of a much larger frustration bubbling under the surface. Let's talk about that frustration. Fans aren't mad just because Sophie got cut. They're mad because the WNBA pretended to be something it's clearly not. For years, it's been branding itself as progressive, open, empowering. A league where women could thrive, speak up, and own their narratives. But now, the moment one of those women actually did that, on her own terms, with her own platform, they pulled the plug. You can't claim to champion player voices and then find those same voices into submission. You can't build your brand on empowerment while penalizing autonomy. You can't post, "We stand with our athletes" during Mental Health Awareness Month, and then punish someone for expressing a fraction of their lived experience. It's hypocritical. It's embarrassing. And worst of all, it's obvious. Because fans aren't stupid. They see the selective enforcement. They see how some players get fined for the smallest things, while others break the same rules and get nothing. They see the politics behind the curtain. And now that Sophie's spilled the tea, they can't unsee it. That's the real damage. Not the fines, not the firing, but the trust lost. Because when your most vocal players are walking on eggshells and your most honest ones are walking out the door, what kind of culture are you building? Not one people are excited to root for, not one players feel safe in, and not one that's going to survive the inevitable next controversy, which, let's be honest, is already loading in the group chat somewhere. And let's give a little side-eye to the silence from fellow players, too. You know they're watching. You know the locker rooms are buzzing. Screenshots flying. DMs lighting up. But publicly, most of them are saying nothing. A few vague tweets here and there, maybe a loyalty is rare caption, but the real takes? Crickets. And that tells you everything. Because if speaking up could get you fined, benched, or cut, why would you risk it? Why would you say a word? This is what a culture of fear looks like. Not people screaming in protest, but people quietly choosing to stay silent. Choosing to protect themselves over telling the truth. That's the scariest part. Not the drama, but the chill it sends through the whole league. So yeah, Sophie might be the first to speak openly about the fines, but you better believe she's not the only one who's felt them. She's just the one who dared to say it out loud. And now, she's the one carrying the cost. But here's the kicker. The league could have avoided all of this. Easily. A conversation. A dialogue. A single moment of humility could have changed the course. They could have sat down with her and said, "Hey, you're raising valid points. Let's talk about how we can work together to improve transparency and officiating." That's literally it. That's the whole fix. Instead, they reach for the mute button. And now they've got a PR crisis, a fan base side-eyeing them harder than a blown call in the playoffs, and a former player who just became a walking headline. So what now? Does Sophie get picked up by another team? Maybe. Do other players start to speak up too? Hopefully. Does the WNBA finally address the issue of these behind-the-scenes fines and how they're selectively enforced? Unclear. But what is clear? The story doesn't end here. Because when you fire someone for telling the truth, you don't bury the story. You broadcast it. Sophie Cunningham was fined for speaking, fired for explaining, and now she's finally free to really say what she wants. No jersey, no contract, no PR leash, just a mic, a message, and a fan base that's already tuned in. So if you're the WNBA, you might want to brace yourself, because you didn't silence her. You gave her the opening scene of a much bigger story, one where she controls the narrative now, one where you can't issue a fine to stop the next sentence, and one where the fans? Yeah, they're finally listening with both eyes wide open. Let us know where you stand. Are these fines about professionalism or control? Did the league overstep? Or was this just business as usual? Drop your takes in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more chaos, controversy, and the stories that actually matter. Because if they won't give us the truth, you know we will. And remember, if speaking honestly gets you fired, maybe it was never about integrity to begin with.